Hello, and welcome to Direct Approach with Wayne Moorehead, a new podcast brought to you by Direct Selling News. Direct Approach is laser-focused on helping direct selling executives next level their strategy, marketing, and brand. Host and DSU audience favorite, Wayne Moorehead and his guests, some of the leading marketers and innovators in direct selling, will tackle these issues in a fun, fast-paced, and frank format, covering topics like customer acquisition and retention, consistent and effective messaging, reputation management, emerging trends, and much more. Each episode is designed to help your marketing and branding teams motivate the field, inspire customers, and further your brand's reach and impact. In this inaugural episode, Wayne is joined by Mark Stastny, CMO at Scentsy. Mark brings more than 25 years of passion and experience in marketing strategy, communications, promotions and programs, customer segmentation, public relations, digital and social marketing, and building world-class brands. Prior to joining Scentsy, Mark spent 13 years at Hewlett-Packard, and before that, worked for marketing agencies in New York City and Seattle, Washington. Nearly doubling revenue in 2020, Scentsy continues to grow. Mark will share how they are managing their season of renewal, both in the field and at corporate. He'll also share Scentsy's proven method to successfully conquer any problem, every time. Wayne and Mark will also share their leadership philosophies and how those philosophies can bring more focus and cohesion to your team. This episode is sponsored by Now Technologies. Are you still looking for the answer to skyrocketing your revenue growth? Sampling is one of the most effective answers for growth companies today. Now Technologies took a good thing and made it better by providing a turnkey sampling system and the secret sauce, the Now app. Sampling cuts through the marketing noise to convert and provide a greater opportunity to enroll new members. Conveniently send orders from your phone with one tap, and the rest is automated. With Now Tech, you have a partner from concept to fulfillment. They've made sampling easy and more powerful than ever before. To learn more about the power of sampling, visit info@now-tech.com. So let's get to it and welcome our host, Wayne Moorehead, and today's guest, CMO of Scentsy, Mark Stastny.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to DSN's Direct Approach podcast. I'm very excited for our guest today, who's had an incredible career, both in and out of the direct selling channel. And so without further ado, I'm excited to announce our new guest and introduce Mark Stastny, CMO at Scentsy, an incredible company that I've been following for a really long time. So Mark, welcome, and thank you very much. And you know, it's amazing that I think we look so similar. So not every guest is probably going to have these same physical similarities, but I want to make sure I know where you get your hair cut and your beard done. Let's swap tips before the end.
Thanks, Wayne. It is very, very good to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Again, appreciate you being on our inaugural podcast here. And we've had the chance to meet really briefly, but I'm really excited because you and I have never had the chance to really dig in and kind of talk shop. And so, you know, in a really informal way, just want to get to know you a little bit more and understand how you think about strategy and branding and marketing. So first, I'd just love for you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and maybe the path that led you to Scentsy.
Cool. So I've been at Scentsy for just over 13 years now. Prior to Scentsy, I worked in other channels. I was with Hewlett-Packard for about the same amount of time, about 13 years. And then prior to that, I was with a series of marketing agencies in New York and in Seattle. True marketer at heart. I went to school in marketing, graduated marketing, and I've pretty much worked in some aspect of marketing, either upstream product development and product marketing or downstream more promotional marketing my entire career. The path to Scentsy is an interesting one. I actually was probably, I'd say at least a skeptic. I wouldn't say I was a critic, but I was at least a skeptic of the direct selling industry prior to my exposure and experience to Scentsy. And I knew Orville and Heidi, who are the co-CEOs of Scentsy. I knew them personally prior to Scentsy joining or entering their life. And I knew Orville pretty well. And I actually, when I first heard that he had invested in or was buying this small fledgling startup candle company that was going to be focused in direct selling, I thought he was insane. I literally, it didn't sit well with me relative to what I knew of Orville before that. And then around me, literally in the neighborhood that I lived in, Scentsy started to kind of emerge and grow up over the next few years. And my wife's sister actually became a Scentsy consultant, and my wife volunteered to host a party at my house. Didn't tell me about it. I was actually out playing basketball, I think, at the time. And I came home, and my living room was full of women, some of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't know. And as a marketer, I immediately got intrigued. And I actually went up on this little balcony overlooking the living room area, and I just watched. And it was really my first exposure to what the power of the direct selling channel could be when it's done well and when it's done right. I, for the life of me as a marketer, couldn't tell who was buying and who was selling. There was a tremendous amount of energy. Catalogs were being passed around. These little fragrance testers were being sniffed. And there was a lot of energy talking about whether they loved the fragrance or they hated the fragrance, but more importantly, what the fragrance reminded them of. And at the end of the evening, and I literally watched this for probably 45 minutes, just fascinated. At the end of the party or at the end of the evening, checkbooks came out and substantial checks were being written. So I watched that transaction, and I remember it making a pretty big impression on me as a marketer. And a lot of the impressions that I had of the industry started to shift to understanding the potential power of this as a channel. All of my experience had been in kind of B2B, B2C, consumer oriented, a lot in the tech space. And so that was fascinating. And I kind of just put that memory in my head. And I think there was another opportunity at my sister-in-law's house that I kind of saw a second dose of that. And then a few years later, or a couple of years later, Orville, the business had grown to a point that Orville was wanting to put an executive team together and start building kind of his team. And he called me and we went out to lunch and talked, and I loved HP. I had a great job, loved that channel, loved the work that I was doing there, but there was something about it that intrigued me, and I decided it was time to make a change. So that's how I came to be at Scentsy, and that was, again, about 13 years ago.
That's amazing. Yeah, it is always such an incredible experience to see the power of direct selling kind of firsthand. It's one thing being at a corporate office. It's another thing getting out and seeing the social, the viral, the cultural aspects of it, firsthand. Really changes your perspective. Again, you said 13 years. To me, that is just absolutely amazing. A long stint as well. And I think that's something that's really defined your career, is kind of that commitment to the job and the role and the company that you're in. It's also a little bit surprising, especially in that, in today's world, the CMO has one of the shortest tenures in the C-suite, usually not lasting more than just a few years. So what has really kept you at Scentsy for 13 years now?
Good question, and fairly easy for me to answer. It actually is the channel. The very thing I was most skeptical about is what has kept me at Scentsy and the people that come along with it. And that's both people from our consultant perspective, getting to meet. I mean, our sales force, our consultants are so diverse in the perspectives they bring. Whether they're interested in spending just a few hours a week or whether they are literally all in and dedicate 100% of their efforts to it. I love seeing the diversity of that sales force and acknowledging that it is different from any other sales mechanism that I had previously worked through. They are not a coin-operated sales force. Anything that you do with them has to have inherent value. They have to see inherent value in what the home office is bringing to them in the form of programs, in the form of assets, because they get to choose how they're going to spend their time. And so I realized that you had to treat this channel very differently, but what keeps me at Scentsy, what's kept me here for 13 years is the people and the continual challenges. Marketing in direct selling is as fluid, as diverse, and as challenging as any channel I have ever worked in. You can't feel like you have to control the message. You can't feel like you have to have control over everything. In the case of Scentsy, we have 300,000 distributors or consultants out there that are, no matter what we do at the home office, they always and should be the primary face of the brand to the world. And for a lot of marketers, that could be very disconcerting because you can't control it. You can't figure out exactly what the outcome is going to be. So we talk about it in terms of democratization of the brand, and you have to get comfortable with that feeling. But I would say the marketing challenges that continue to present themselves every day, combined with the people, are what keep me here.
That's great. No, I love that rationale and reasoning for staying. Again, congrats on such a long tenure. You said something really interesting right there. Again, having spent time myself, in and out of direct selling, the media, the marketing, the communication landscape has really changed. And I do think it is really disconcerting for a lot of marketers that come in from other channels who have come from kind of a command and control, who now have to shift into this, engage and empower. So being in such kind of a fluid role, especially, in the marketing role, channels, social platforms, technologies change so rapidly. How do you stay current? How do you stay up to date and kind of have your finger on the pulse of what's coming around the corner, so you know how best to leverage that to empower your members and customers?
Yeah. So one, I lean on a very good team. We've hired a marketing team, and we have what we call channel managers that are kind of responsible for different and distinct channels that we service, and obviously that our consultants do as well. I lean on them pretty heavily to make sure that I am getting the best thinking and the latest and greatest of what's coming on the next horizon and the horizon after that, in the email channel, in the SMS text channel, in the social media channel, in the paid social media channel, in influencer marketing, public relations. All of those channels, I've got solid people that help me keep an eye on that. And then the next level up, which I do consider it my responsibility to be keeping an eye on, things like, how is technology being used? How is data, rich data, deep data being used to send the right messages at the right time in the right place? Not only from the home office, but allowing our consultants to be able to do that using CRM systems, DAM systems, digital asset management systems, content management systems. That is really the domain that I need to keep an eye on. To that, I look to a lot of different sources, but I would say stay very well connected and networked within the industry to peers. I lean heavily on perspective from other companies, some of which are much younger than we are, but have a much, they don't have some of the baggage that we carry with us relative to investments and mindsets, some of which are very established companies that have been around a lot longer than we have and are a lot larger. I look to all of those perspectives and lean heavily on what I would call industry peers in a network to help me keep an eye on what they're seeing. And then the last and very important, stay close to your field and your consultants. We always want to make sure that we don't get too far out in front of leading our consultants. I wouldn't say we are cutting edge, but we have to outpace and be leading and guiding them, but stay close enough to their needs so that they can engage with us.
I totally agree. Looking to the needs of your distributors is going to help direct. They might not always know what they want. They might not be able to articulate what the right technology or something is, but they certainly are amazing at communicating things that they need, processes, programs, communication channels. They're great at explaining what they need. And so I do think it's, the CMO's role and the marketing team's role to kind of interpret that and bring back solutions. Yeah.
Interpret's a great word, because the questions you ask them should never be, what do you want us to build for you? The question should be, tell me about your pain points. Tell me about your frustration points. And then we can, again, knowing what's kind of coming down the horizon, we can triangulate or Venn diagram overlap what we are seeing as far as potential and what their pain points are. But
yeah, I love that. So, being, 20, 25 years into your career or something like that, maybe 20. Sorry, I'm not trying to tack on additional years there. But
you're probably being generous, but go ahead.
Okay. What advice would you give a first-time CMO in the direct selling channel? Now that you can kind of look back, what would be one primary piece of advice for that individual?
So I will assume that they have grown up. Actually, I'll answer your question as not assuming they've grown up in the channel. Because if they've grown up in the channel, they understand a lot about what marketing means in direct selling. And it means very different things, in my opinion, in direct selling than it does in other channels. So assuming they are coming in fairly new from the outside, I would actually tell them to start with understanding the different dynamics and the fluidity of marketing, understanding the concept of democratization of the brand and learning to figure out how you align your values and your messaging platforms with your consultants or your distributors, but then also being willing to step back and trust and empower them. Again, that probably would be the biggest hurdle for someone coming in from the outside, is just assuming they can take what made them successful in industry A or B or company A and B and just apply it the same way in this channel. And that is not true at all. So I would say deeply understand, honestly, the nuances, differences, and power that this channel has to offer, then bring their experiences from channel A, B, or industry A, B, or C, wherever they're coming from, but be humble enough to recognize that doing things the way they've done it in other industries might not work if it's done in the exact same way. But if you honor and respect the potential of this power and honestly the consultants and distributors and what they bring to the table, then you can do wonderful things.
That is so great. And I honestly couldn't agree more. Spending time, again, my career off and on has been in this, direct selling channel inside and outside. And I am always amazed at that learning curve, especially in the marketing. You can pull in a CFO, you can pull in, a general counsel, you can pull in an IT and ops, and I feel like it's a little easier for them to hit the ground running. But I've always seen people from the outside, if they come in at like the CMO level, really, really struggle to understand, the channel and those dynamics, because they do, instinctually, they're going to run the playbook that they ran, in maybe a D2C brand or, through a retail channel. And it does take a little bit of time to learn the different levers and those nuances. You get growth through pulling different levers here in direct selling. And so I love that. I love kind of how you worded it as have the humility, because I do think, especially for a new CMO, just come in and listen for a little while. It doesn't mean you're sitting there doing nothing. It's a very active process, but just understand what's going on in the channel, what's going on with the distributor force, the customer, in the category. So I love that. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, the folks that we hire on the marketing team, I usually expect about a year for them to fully ramp up and understand the channel. The best and the fastest and the quickest, unless they have prior experience in direct selling, 6 months is generous, optimistic. But I usually expect it to take about a year. And so certainly they're going to be doing work during that time frame. But in order for them to really hit their stride, and honestly, the ones that really make it with us long term and really contribute long term, and we do have a fairly long tenure with most of the folks that come here, are the ones that have that humility and are willing to basically take the best of what they bring, but then adapt it in ways that will work for this channel.
That's really interesting. I'm going to double click on that for a second. Do you communicate that to them ahead of time, or when they start, that they do have a little bit of runway, a little bit of permission to kind of learn and understand?
Anyone that joins the marketing team, I interview during that interview process. And I don't interview them, honestly, I don't interview them at all for their capabilities or competencies against a position plan or a job description. My sole purpose for meeting with them is to check fit, and also to help set them up for success by helping them understand a little bit more about our culture, a little bit more about our values, and kind of what the success path is from my perspective, again, 50,000 foot level in joining the company. And I always emphasize two things. One, get to know this industry, get to know consultants, spend every opportunity you have, whether it's sitting next to a person in our call center, watching them interact with our consultants, whether it's attending every consultant event you possibly can, which this last year has been a challenge, whether it is watching the dialogue online on our Facebook groups between our leaders and between the home office and leaders. Every opportunity you have, get to know our consultants, and as much as you can, try and walk a mile in their shoes. Try to understand their perspective. But I also do share that they should bring, I want them to bring perspectives. I want them to bring knowledge, expertise from their prior jobs, but to be cautious and not feel like they've got to come in and hit the ground running and impress us with everything that they've done and done exactly the same way. So I try to help them understand that they have runway with regards to both time, don't try and rush it, and two, if you make some mistakes and slip up, that's okay. As long as you're learning from it, and as long as one of the reasons I actually think we can operate fairly well in decision-making at Scentsy is if you have the lens of what is the right thing to do for the consultant, first and foremost, even more than the right thing to do with the profit or loss or revenue of the business. If you are always putting the decision through the lens or filter of what's the right thing to do for the consultant, you will never go that far astray here.
I love that you give them the permission to learn, to develop that empathy, for the members and for the customers, as well as an understanding of the channel. Again, marketing is all about, uncovering those insights and, turning those into strategies and tactics. So that's really amazing. So kudos to you for being able to lead that way. I wish I, had a chance to work for you early in my career and learn those lessons. You mentioned something, you brought up values, which is something I know is very important at Scentsy. And, I spent time as a brand strategist at an agency. And so I've walked a lot of companies through defining or redefining their brand platforms, whether it's their brand positioning, their brand purpose, mission, vision, values. And I've always been surprised at how soft, something like core values is considered by some companies and how quickly they can be abandoned in the pursuit of growth. And that's definitely not the case at Scentsy. And I think there's a great story that I've heard that kind of articulates this that I wonder if you can talk about. But I know that, Heidi, one of the co-CEOs, co-founders, was in a strategy meeting and they were discussing certain issues and she kind of interjected and stopped the meeting and said, help me understand what this has to do with our values. And I think that kind of stopped people in their tracks. Can you elaborate on that story a little bit and how that's gone on to not only inform how you develop strategies and how you do your job, but kind of the larger kind of cultural implications that it had at Scentsy?
Sure. And I'm going to back up a little bit even before that story. And I will get to that. But I want to tell you, when I first joined, so I joined in 2008, 2009, we had some real challenging issues from a business perspective at that time. We were trying to keep up with growth. Hyper growth was getting ahead of us and we were having a challenge. So there were some instances where we under-delivered significantly to our consultants, and that caused them to under-deliver to their customers. And I watched Orville and Heidi in their decision-making process when we were in some of those pretty challenging, tough times in those first couple of years. And most of my background, whether it was on the agency side, working with companies, or obviously my Hewlett Packard career, was working with publicly traded companies that are very geared towards analyst reports and near-term or short-term financial goals. And that's how those companies are geared. That's how they're driven. So that was where I had come from and was most comfortable operating. I watched Orville and Heidi in those first couple of years make decisions, multi-million-dollar decisions that would hit the bottom line in a bad way to do the right thing or make things right for our consultants or our consultants' customers, honoring and respecting the relationship between our consultants, which again was a pretty small fledgling field at the time. But I watched them repeatedly make decisions, and they didn't even ask for the financial analysis. They didn't even ask for the spreadsheet to say, show me how hard this is going to hit us. They said, we're going to do it because it is the right thing to do. So I learned very early on in those first couple of years that the reason Scentsy felt different from an environment perspective was because those values were truly a manifestation of who Orville and Heidi were or aspired to be, and they were a lens through which they made decisions. And one freaked me out a little at the beginning, I have to be honest. It was a little bit alarming because I remember several times thinking if this were a publicly traded company, these Orville and Heidi would be fired for the decisions they're making, because it would likely hurt the business in the near term, even though it was the absolute right thing to do in the long term. And most businesses, my experience with businesses, most businesses aren't operated with that kind of freedom to be what I would call a values-based business. The mission statement Orville and Heidi put in place right at the beginning has not changed at all. The values, the three values, what I learned is those were not just statements on a wall. They were lenses through which decisions were evaluated on a daily basis. So fast forward to the meeting that you were talking about. We had built up an executive team and we were still kind of coming through growth pretty well. But we had built this executive team that was used to doing functional plans and quarterly reviews from other industries. One, you got to understand Orville and Heidi are entrepreneurs at heart. Orville and Heidi bristle a bit at corporate bureaucracy. They do. Ask Heidi to attend a planning meeting, particularly an annual planning meeting. She would probably rather be anywhere else in the world rather than that. So it's painful as is. But she came in and we started going through these very siloed thinking. It wasn't really integrated thinking. It was very siloed thinking, basically functional plans that all of us were going to bat for whatever great ideas we had and whatever funding we felt we needed. And Heidi picked up on a couple of things. One, they weren't integrated in their thought at all. And two, they really hadn't been developed with the consultant and our values as a significant lens through which they're evaluated. And so her body language shifted. She was sitting in the front of the room at the beginning, and then you could tell she was getting a little bit irritated and disinterested. And then she actually physically got up and walked towards the back of the room and kept listening politely to these presentations. But if you were reading her body language, you could tell she was getting less and less comfortable. And at one point, we got to a point where there was probably a pause, and she asked the question, what does any of this have to do with who we are, with our values, with Scentsy spirit, and how we create energy and Scentsy spirit amongst our consultants? And so the meeting pivoted at that point. I think Orville which is usually the case, Heidi usually will be the one that offers the incredible insight, usually in very few words. And then Orville, this is the dynamic of how the two of them just complement each other. He will pick up on that and he will say, okay, what are we going to do about it? So Orville took over, he took the pen, and we basically looked at all of the things that we had, and we graded ourselves based on our values, the lens of our values, against how each of the things on that list stood up against our core values. And so we basically revamped that was our annual planning meeting. We basically revamped everything, and we came together with what I would call would be a much more integrated view of the things that mattered most. And it fundamentally reshaped not only that year's plans, but I would say planning processes into future years. We've migrated. We don't do what I would call independent functional plans anymore. We have a much more integrated process. And trust me, how it relates to our values, the consultant perspective and point of view, or contributing to Scentsy spirit is absolutely a lens through which we look at everything through. So,
what an incredible defining moment and learning experience for not just everybody in the room, but for the company as well, to have this defining moment, which I think gives people permission, throughout the company to say, no, we're going to make decisions based through, as you use the analogy of the lens, we're going to use these values as a lens. And I love that terminology that you use in that analogy, a lens and a filter. When we have firmly established values and, really clear direction and purpose and brand positioning, it actually makes decision-making much easier. They can be tough decisions emotionally, financially, but the yes or no should come really quickly if you're using your values as a filter or a lens.
Well, most people are probably aware Orville and Heidi are going to be taking a sabbatical for a 3-year period of time. It actually is what gives me a high degree of confidence. They will be missed. Their connection with the field will be missed. The field is actually very supportive of their decision and what they're doing, but certainly their presence will be missed. But from a business decision-making perspective, I'm not concerned about it because they have built an executive team, and deep into the organization, the values are the lens through which we make decisions. And like I said before, as long as I'm making decisions within that swim lane and knowing that I'm being honest with myself relative to how this is going to better serve the needs of our consultants, I can confidently make those decisions. And we as an executive team, minus Orville and Heidi, have become quite good at doing that because they have taught us over the years to rely on and trust those lenses, because those are the exact same lenses through which they would be guiding our decision-making process.
That's so amazing. That was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you a little bit later, is with their departure for a few years, how that was going to impact the culture and kind of the day-to-day. But it sounds like they and you as the executive team have done such an amazing job of really kind of establishing those anchors, and those lenses through which to make decisions that everybody kind of knows their job and is going to be able to continue to function. So that's amazing. Again, what incredible leadership for them to be able to establish things so well that they can, step back a little bit and still be confident that things will get done and decisions will be made as they would have.
Yeah,
so
that's
incredible.
Say, that's been a 14-year journey or so, because it's just how they've managed and lived.
Sure.
I would say
Sure.
the last 2 to 3 years, it's been very deliberate and intentional. They have deliberately and intentionally pulled back on certain things, moved people into different roles, to where, again, with the exception of, I would say, that field connection, which they still do maintain, pretty much everything else from an operational perspective and a decision-making perspective has not been run up kind of through the Orville and Heidi level for some time. And again, I attribute that to good leadership.
Amazing. Scentsy is certainly lucky to have such incredible leaders. So I want to shift for a second and talk a little bit more kind of on the strategy side, get an understanding of how you develop strategies, the different types of strategies you've deployed, and specifically around looking for growth. So, a few main areas, in really any company, in any channel, you're going to look at extending into new channels. So new sales channels, which really isn't an option, primarily for us in direct selling, looking at new markets, and then third, new products. And that's what I want to focus on. So, as a brand guy, I love focus, I love clarity. But looking at brands over the long term, they also need excitement. They also need continued energy. They also need continued relevance. So as you looked at extending the Scentsy brand and original product line from a very limited portfolio to really what's quite a broad portfolio now, how did you think about the strategy of where to extend first? Brands are elastic. You can stretch them into new categories and opportunities, but you can also stretch them so far that they break. So how did you approach, where to go first, where to go second, and get an understanding from your consultants and customers where you had permission to extend?
Yeah, very, very good question. And I would say we did it a bit by trial and error, and we actually erred in some areas and pulled back. So it was actually a very good learning experience for us. Coming off of our peak hypergrowth when things started to slow a bit, and we also we had competition in what I would call our core product areas in big box stores and grocery stores all around us. We had taken an idea that had existed for many years, and we socialized it in a way that it really hit critical mass. We reached some tipping points with regards, but as soon as those tipping points started to be reached and it started to get a lot of exposure, pretty much every retail outlet in the area that it made sense to sell, were selling it. And honestly, that unnerved us a bit. We thought, This is going to be very, very tough. In the long run, that competition actually ended up being healthy and really wasn't fundamentally detrimental. But when we weren't certain about that looking forward, we did have some concerns, and we made some decisions. Scentsy, actually underneath the Scentsy umbrella, we had a couple of other brands that we launched, other programs that we launched that were selling products that really had very little to do with what the Scentsy catalog had in it at the time. And we learned over the course of a couple, 2 to 3 years, that we could be successful at that, but the cost of lack of focus was also very real. And that's true certainly for our field, but also even for our employees and how we were serving them. And so we actually pulled back from both of those brands, one of which was already profitable. It actually was doing quite well, and introduced in a completely different arena, or possibly even different channel. I'm still convinced to this day it could do very, very well. But for us at the time, we realized that lack of focus wasn't helping us overall. And so we actually got rid of those brands. And then we got very focused on exactly your question. Where do we believe this brand can and should go? And because, for instance, I'll give you an example. We were kind of being pulled into the pets category. Pets is a multi-billion-dollar category. People love their pets, and they love to spend money on toys and other things for their pets. But even within the pet realm, we could be encouraged, or we could be drawn from the potential market to go into all aspects of pets. Well, we didn't. We basically said, in order for Scentsy to go there, it needs to have an anchor and a tie to fragrance. And so fragrance for us became that anchor of, we are not going to go into areas, product areas outside of the fragrance realm. So pets is an example of one where we do have a line of pet products, but we have stayed very much within the realm where fragrance and pets come together in a consumer mind. Another example would be essential oils. Essential oils have been very popular and sold in a number of different ways to consumers. We do have essential oils in our product lineup, but we only approach essential oils from the fragrance experience that essential oils can provide. We don't go into any other aspects, even though, again, we might be very successful marketing them. We basically anchor it in and around the fragrance experience. And so that's really where we have kind of, from a product expansion perspective, new products categories, new product lines, product families, we basically say we're going to stay within the swim lane of fragrance. And so far that has served us very well. And I don't anticipate or see us getting to a point where we will need to abandon or go beyond that underneath the Scentsy brand umbrella.
I want to highlight that because, again, strategically, I think that's amazing. I think so few companies actually establish, as you said, kind of those anchor points, or, I've referenced them as, these key brand associations that your brand, becomes known for. And taking that and leveraging that and extending it into new products and new opportunities, I think is exactly, from a strategy standpoint, the right way to go. And so often, I think people kind of, fumble with product launches in and out of direct selling, because clearly for me, it's relevancy, because they don't have that anchor that they're using to kind of leverage into a new space. And so it gets confusing for consumers and for consultants when they don't understand why you're going somewhere or how that relates to other products in the portfolio. So, man, this is incredible. You're absolutely completely speaking my language. So this is really fun for me. One other question on that, as you launch, and introduce new products, how do you bring the consultants along for the ride? How do you make sure that it fits in the compensation plan, in their duplication model? How do you make sure that they're kind of prepared and they understand why you're launching these products as well?
And this goes way beyond product launches. This is across all aspects of how you stay close to your field. We definitely involve our consultants in the journey, and particularly the leadership in the field. We bring them along and we engage them fairly early at the strategy level. And we bring them along with us. So instead of this as being something that is being done to them as leaders, that they very much feel this has been a strategy that we've been aware of. We've been able to give our input. Certainly data tells us from a, price value profitability perspective. We've got lots of data that we use relative to the types of products that would probably do well. And so data comes to the table absolutely with certain things. But then we always involve our consultants fairly early in that process, so that when it comes to actual launching, the field leaders are amped about it, because it's them helping us, the home office, take it to their teams and kind of unveiling it. And so I would say stay close to your field in both listening to them, again, don't use them to tell you everything that you should be doing. I wouldn't recommend that at all. But if you don't find a way to incorporate their point of view, their perspective, and go through that change management process with them, you might find that what you are so excited about in the product launch actually might be counterproductive and sucking the energy out of the field. We very much view field as, we call it flywheel momentum. When you have that momentum going, and going strongly, when things are clicking, when there's high trust between the field and the home office, and you're giving them products that they value, and you're making their jobs easier with regards to both the products you're giving them as well as the systems and programs you give them to operate it, keeping that flywheel momentum going and actually spin even faster feels pretty easy. But man, when you do things that undermine that momentum and slow that flywheel down, getting it going again or getting it back up to speed is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So we recognize that we have to stay close to our field, listening to them and involving them, in order for us to have the minimal amount of friction that we are putting on the flywheel.
That's great. Keeping them involved all the way upstream from strategy down through launch. So you brought up the concept of momentum, which is something that we all talk about a lot in the direct selling channel. And you mentioned that, getting that flywheel going, getting that momentum, takes a lot of effort. And once it slows down, getting that momentum going again is a challenge. It can be really tough. Sometimes it can take a lot more effort the second time than it did the first time. Scentsy's been an incredible company to watch. It's had periods of, more momentum, slower momentum. And I've heard Orville and Heidi, and I've heard you mention as well, that anytime that momentum or that flywheel slows down a little bit, that you talk about going back to the basics. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you and what Scentsy mean by going back to the basics?
Yeah. Usually when it happens, it's because we've taken our eye off the ball of those lenses through which we're looking at the business. Usually you can always track when there is a slowing of momentum. And it's not to say there aren't external factors that are influencing our business or our consultants, because there are. I mean, this last year, pandemic, perfect example. There are external factors. But within the things that we can, and I'm not going to use the word control, but we can influence, usually if we have done something from a home office to slow that momentum or put inefficiencies in the flywheel, it's usually because we've lost sight of that, whether it's simplicity, whether it's authenticity, whether it's generosity. And so usually going back to the basics for us is evaluating why that happened and course correcting. I used the word humility before. Orville and Heidi have taught us that we don't have it all figured out. That part of the reason why we want to listen to our field, listen to what data is telling us, is because we can't just assume that we're going to double down on every decision that's made, assuming it was the right decision. We're okay to say, look, that was a bad decision. We're going to course correct. And so going back to the basics, I think usually means realigning with those core values and the things that will drive energy coming out of those core values. The two brands that we launched and then subsequently canceled are a good example of that. Going back to the basics was re-anchoring around Scentsy and looking and saying, fragrance, we could have been encouraged to go after what I would call the broader home decor market. Most of our products are also home decor, and I would put our designers up against, frankly, any in the world from a home decor perspective. The home decor space is a wide space. And we basically said, no, we're going to go after home decor where it intersects with fragrance. We're not going to go compete against Magnolia. We're not going to go compete against other heavy players in that space. So I think, again, it gets back to understanding where lack of momentum usually is on us because we've lost sight of those things temporarily, and re-anchoring in those, and any decisions that have been made that frankly are poor decisions, not being so prideful that we have to continue them, we'll abandon them and come back to kind of what that anchor is.
That's great. Thank you very much for that explanation. So there's definitely proof that it works, especially looking back at 2020, a very disruptive year for just about every company out there, a year of change, a year of learning. But you and Scentsy came out of it very, very strong. I don't know if you're sharing the numbers. I won't give the number, but it was growth in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, we about doubled in size last year.
That's amazing. That's crazy. That is so amazing. Congratulations. So again, it seems like it kind of comes full circle. Is that going back to basics? Using those values as anchors, using those brand associations for as strategic pillars. It's not always rocket science, but sometimes we get so distracted and so confused or enticed by the next shiny object that we always run after other things. And then we have to kind of, thump our own foreheads sometimes to go, let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to those anchors and rely on and leverage those for growth. But congrats on the incredible growth. That's amazing.
I appreciate that. The lesson I would share from 2020 to me is actually, it's also one of those things on the list that I would share with a new CMO as well. We entered 2020 pre-pandemic in a pretty good spot with our field. We had a decent amount of energy and momentum. We had some good products that were coming out in the licensed space. And our relationship with our field and our top leaders was in about as good a place as it had been in for several years. So we came into it with equity built up and in a pretty good spot. When the pandemic started to hit, our value of authenticity kicked in. We were extremely honest, not with our entire field, because we didn't want them worrying or concerned about questions that we didn't have the answers to at that point. But when we were not sure if we were going to be able to continue to get supply, while most of our fragrance products are manufactured in the US, a good chunk of our hard goods products are manufactured in Asia and or in India. So at that point in time, we were looking at this going, I don't know if we're going to be able to continue to get product in at all. We didn't know if the factories that make our product were going to be able to continue making it at the levels that we would need them to. So one, would we have product? Two, as the pandemic kind of found its way from a China isolated thing to a global pandemic, we didn't know if we were going to be able to continue to operate our businesses locally to service our consultants, if we would be allowed to continue operating in the markets that where our distribution centers are located in the US, where our headquarters are located. And so we had to obviously go into high gear very quickly to do everything we could to keep employees safe in all types of work environments, as well as try and make sure we could still keep our shipping and distribution centers going. Through that process, when there was a lot of uncertainty, instead of us going quiet on our field leaders and just saying, we don't know the answer, so we're not going to say anything, we opened up to them and regularly were giving them updates. And Orville and Heidi were doing Facebook Lives with our top field leaders. And the level of transparency and authenticity in those discussions was amazing. It truly was. And when the field got visibility to the lengths that Orville and Heidi were going to, and that the employees were going to try and continue to operate so they could run their businesses, an amazing thing happened. And that was, they basically said, there's always been this positive yin-yang relationship that Orville and Heidi established literally at the very 2004, very beginning. And it has continued to manifest itself as we have grown, but there has always been, and it's not an intentional thing, it's more an outcome or a byproduct of, I think, doing business the right way. But there's always been this positive yin-yang relationship. And what we saw in April, May, June was the field basically took that heartfelt feelings that Orville and Heidi and other executives were sharing with them and the openness. And they said, if the home office is going to do everything they're doing, we are going to reciprocate and do everything we can to make sure that the field is shifting from in-home parties or person to person to everything being digital, online, and e-commerce. We were already heading down that path, so we had a lot of the infrastructure in place for it, but our field, I don't think, had massively made that shift. Last year, they did. And they launched, the field leaders, not us. The field leaders actually launched programs in those first 3 formative months that were encouraging their teams to engage and not give up on their business, but to actually engage customers. And I will be honest with you, that more than anything else we did specifically set the tone for the year and caused the growth that we saw. And that was not a home office generated program. Yes, all of the environment around it that led up to it was we were in a pretty good spot and our values kicked in and we just did what our values told us to do. But what the field did with it, and this to me is, again, the remarkable thing about this channel that most marketers coming in from the outside won't understand. This was not a coin-operated Salesforce type move. This was leadership from our field saying, we're going to go make a difference. And we're going to do it because of how well Orville, Heidi, and the home office teams have treated us, how they've always had our back, and how much they're doing today to stay safe and allow us to continue to operate their business. And those field-generated programs and that field-generated momentum and energy was more than anything we could have done from the home office.
Wow. Which again can come back to being true to what you believe, to your values, kind of those rules that you've established. And when you are, to your point, that authenticity and that trust is there with the field, and they'll break down barriers for you. They'll walk through walls. Yep. It's amazing when they know that they can trust you, that you're going to do what you say and do what you believe. An incredible trust can form between the field and the home office.
If you spend any time with Orville, you'll pick up on a couple things. One, he definitely believes that in direct selling, you have to live by the mantra of first do no harm. As an industry and as we have to basically do no harm to the relationships that we have with our customers, with new prospects or new consultants that join. We have to have that mindset of first do no harm. Then beyond that, very much there is a mantra at Scentsy, which is really central and core to our values, around contribute more than you take. You have to, if everyone in the world engaged every relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a personal relationship, with the thought or the idea that I'm approaching this relationship willing to give or contribute more than I'm looking to extract or take from it, then value in the world actually rises and increases. If everyone approaches those relationships the opposite direction, I'm wanting to take more than I'm willing to give, value actually decreases in the world. And again, comes from an Albert Einstein quote that impressed him as a young boy. But We live by that constantly. And that, again, those dynamics of contribute more than you take bidirectionally both ways was in strong play in the early months of the pandemic.
What an amazing approach and amazing rules to live by. Two quick questions to wrap up. So one, what keeps you up at night? In your role as CMO there at Scentsy, what keeps you up at night?
I've mentioned them a little bit throughout the course of this dialogue. We are needing to invest pretty significantly in what I would call the next generation of technology platforms that will enable us to market and more importantly, our consultants to market to their customers in much more efficient and effective ways, using data, using technology, even our e-commerce platform. Right now, what's keeping me up at night is we are needing to make decisions for the technology platforms that will drive us into the next wave of growth. And that's where a lot of my effort, energy, focus, and attention is. Again, fortunately, many other aspects of the business right now are going relatively well, but that is probably the biggest single thing that's keeping me up is those decisions, big decisions that are needing to be made. And I'm not talking about big in terms of how much it's going to cost us. I'm talking about the right decisions that will best serve our consultants and their customers in some pretty important areas when it comes to marketing. That's what keeps me up at night right now.
So final question, what gets you out of bed in the morning? How do you stay inspired?
Again, easy. It's the people. It's literally the things that I was probably most not understanding and most skeptical about this industry is still what motivates me in the morning. We have an amazing sales force and we have hired amazing employee teams that get to work with that sales force or our consultants. It is the individuals and the stories that I continually hear about what this industry can do for people's lives, how they view themselves, how they view their contributions to their society, to their communities, even to their families. I've seen enough of the good and what can be done that it, again, gives me this insatiable appetite for figuring out how I can hire the right teams, the right people, and give them the right leadership here to basically enable that. We view profit and revenue as lag measures. That's not why we do what we do. We view those as indicators of, are we on the right track? Are we doing the right thing? So that's what gets me up in the morning, keeps me coming in.
I love it. Mark, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible for me to, finally get a chance to talk to you, but gain great insights. I love what you've shared around strategy, around product launches, around using values as anchors and lenses. Great reminders, great learning opportunities. I want to go back and listen to this again, but thank you for all you've done for Scentsy. Thank you for all that you continue to do for direct selling channel as a whole, for being such a great advocate for it and a believer in it. And look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks, Wayne. Likewise, appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mark.